Hey, right now on a special Holy Week episode 80 of The Flip Side about apologetics, here's what we're going to learn.
The power of story.
And the power of asking questions.
And the reason that Dina Davidson, the #1 apologetics expert I know, is hiding in a car during The Flip Side. Join us right now on The Flip Side. Where I'm talking to two of the smartest people I know, and also two of the kindest people I know, in terms of, can we really believe that Easter was a real event? Are we celebrating all this and getting, our Easter eggs and dresses on all these years for a myth, or did this thing actually happen? So I've got Dina Davidson tuning into us live from where she is raising a small child. Dina, you seem to be in a car.
I am. This is real life, Kurt. Like, I have a possibly screaming child at home, so I thought this would be a quieter place. I'm logged on to the Wi-Fi at Pete's, but I'm keeping my social distancing.
I'm glad you did that, because your child is adorable, wonderful, and has a phenomenally strong diaphragm. I have heard it. So
yeah, she does. It's great, and she doesn't even need to be frustrated, just expressing her thoughts.
Excellent. And then also we have Wesley Town. How you holding up in Davis, Wesley Town?
I'm doing well. It's sunny today. That's always a good day for me.
So, Wesley, some people may not realize your background. Just like me, you worked a lot with university students. In fact, your former church was where was it?
Planted a church in Eugene, Oregon, hometown of University of Oregon. We also call it Nike Town. And worked with lots of university students and led a church for 10 years in Eugene.
So you and I and Dina love to have these conversations all the time, because Dina's background in philosophy and apologetics, my background with students, your background with students. Students ask a ton of questions, and I love questions. And I love talking about faith in terms of both the experience that we have and also the reason and logic behind it, and making sure that those two worlds are not two separate worlds. And so this is kind of fun for me, because I got two of my favorite friends who want to talk apologetics. So I'm just going to go rapid fire at some questions for you guys. Okay. So first of all, Dina, to you, make the case for historical Christianity. If you've grown up in church, you might have heard some of this, but this is great time to revisit it. If you're new to the topic, just lay it out for us, Dina. Was this a historical event? What evidence is there?
Sure. So let me start by saying that Christianity is unique in that it has a historical claim at the heart of its religion. So Paul actually tells us that if the resurrection did not happen, we should just go home. Like, we should stop worshiping God. We should stop obeying him, because our faith is null and void if the resurrection didn't happen. So it actually makes Christianity really unique in that our entire faith hinges on this historical event. So because of that, it's really important that we actually ask the question, did the resurrection happen? And as a philosophy student, I encountered a pretty amazing, powerful argument in one of my philosophy classes by the philosopher David Hume. And he wrote this very powerful, very influential argument against trusting the testimony of miracles. And so I need to start by addressing that argument. Basically, David Hume said we should dismiss reports of the miraculous before even weighing the evidence, because all of our experience in the world tells us that the miraculous is impossible. A few problems with David Hume's argument, and this has been pointed out by both Christian and non-Christian philosophers. First, if David Hume's argument is correct, it actually proves too much. Basically, his argument says that even if the miraculous were to happen, we shouldn't believe it because it's so improbable. The thing is, miracles are improbable events given the definition of improbability. Improbability is something that is not likely to happen. Because of the nature of miraculous events, we can't just stack up all the evidence against the miraculous and say, see, it's so unlikely. What we have to do is we have to weigh the evidence. and take a look at what happened in history. So, basic argument, I don't have time to go into all of these details, but I'll
Let me
point
just
you to
stop you
some.
right there and summarize. Am I getting this right? Just because something by its nature is unlikely, unlikeliness is not evidence itself that it didn't happen.
That's right. Yeah, basically we're begging the question, which is ridiculous if we say, miraculous events are impossible or miraculous events are improbable, therefore we shouldn't believe them. That is the definition of a miracle, is a supernatural, unlikely event happening. So we have to take a look at the evidence to see whether there's any reason a rational person would agree that this improbable and impossible, in the sense of couldn't happen without supernatural intervention, event actually happened. So why would a rational person believe that the resurrection happened? Well, it all goes back to what happened in the first century. There are certain historical events that people agree these things happened. What is the best explanation for those things? Such as the empty tomb. Virtually all New Testament scholars agree that the tomb was empty. Why? Because certain facets of history and what happens next in the story, not just the Christian story, but the story of the universe, the story of what's happened on earth, is really difficult to explain unless there's an empty tomb. So the empty tomb, a weird one, but just that the Jews ended up switching the day they worshiped from Saturday to Sunday. There are certain events in history that are really difficult to explain if the resurrection didn't happen. So our job as great historical scholars, or just people interested in history, is we actually have to go be students of the first century, figure out what was going on, what events happened, and then we have to weigh the different explanations to figure out what makes the best sense of what was going on in those times. And there are many people who have literally devoted their lives to answering this question. So let me just quote a non-Christian to you. Antony Flew, he was for years one of the most prominent atheist philosophers of our time. Really for a generation defined why we shouldn't believe in God. Towards the end of his life, this was about 10 years ago, he actually became a theist. So he's not a Christian, but he believes in a personal God. So he never actually committed his life to Christ and said, I'm a Christian. So this is why I'm quoting him to you. He's not on our side if you're a Christian. But he said the reports of the resurrection should be seriously considered. The evidence for the resurrection of Jesus Christ was very convincing to him. It didn't convince him to become a Christian, but even him, like someone who for years believed that there was no God, it was one of the things that he found it incredibly difficult to explain. So that's the argument. And then should I give them some resources, Kurt? Because I'm sure some people are like, she's so wrong. Like, this is ridiculous.
Let me get Wesley in this. You hold the resources. We'll get those
okay.
at the end. By the way, I want to just tell everyone, Dina said, how much time do I have to do this? And I said, 3 to 5 minutes. She said, impossible.
So small.
You did a really good job, Dina. Wesley, what's the most convincing part? You've studied this evidence over and over again. You've had these conversations late into the night with students. For you personally, the most compelling part of the evidence, Dina mentioned 2 things. I could think of 6 more. What is the most compelling part of the historical nature of this New Testament experience to you?
Yeah, I think you go back to the New Testament, the early disciples, they were always appealing to firsthand knowledge. In other words, after Jesus rose from the dead, he showed himself in his resurrected state to over 500 people. And those people carried on the message, and they were always appealing to the fact that they saw him, they touched him, they conversed with him, they interacted with him. And so I think that was a really important thread of evidence. I think as well as you look at the disciples, you look at their history before Jesus, their history after coming to spend 3.5 years with Jesus, and then post-resurrection, their entire way of life changed.
Yeah.
Who they were, what they did, the trajectory of their life, their vocation, like every bit of their life was transformed. And I think, a lot of us, we can dial into all the evidence and figure out the construct to, prove the resurrection. But I think the fact that God transforms people's lives is such a powerful evidence of the death and resurrection of Jesus. To me, that is most convincing.
Here's how I've said it to students for years. Said basically, if you just take everything I've learned about apologetics and put it down in the simplest form, we are here. Nothing comes from nothing. He was here. Something historically happened right there. And it's like you said, Dina, many New Testament scholars who don't believe in the deity of Christ go, the only way to explain this is they really believed it. The only way to explain it is they really believed it. One little note on that he was here thing related to what you said, Dina. In Luke, it says they worshiped him. They worshiped him. Now, you could read that 1,000 times as a Gentile and not understand how powerful that is. Until you start understanding how wrong it was to worship anything but God himself in the Jewish mindset, how truly unpagan they were, polytheistic they were, and how, the 3 of the 10 commandments are just repeating over and over. Here's a different version of do not worship anything but the true God. And then one day they saw him rise from the dead and they worshiped him. It's a massive transformation, Wesley, like you're talking about. So we are here. He was here. And then what you said, Wesley, he is here. He's changed me. Now, if you just look at one of those, you can say, well, maybe that's not strong enough to build the whole argument on. Maybe that's a subjective experience. But when you start looking at it together, it really does become very, very compelling, at least compelling enough. I've said this to a lot of people. If you're going to read all of the new atheists and what everyone wants to say snarky on the internet, please read the best thinkers on the other side. Even the non-Christians that have grappled with this in an honest way. And Dina, I am going to get back to you, and you are going to be able to give your reference, because I got a couple references too I want to throw in here at the end, and I bet you could predict what mine are. Let me shift the conversation though. It used to be we'd sit in coffee shops and I would say, who rolled the stone away? What happened to the guards? All these arguments. Now, I don't think people want to have that conversation. And the reason is because we've all learned this: debate doesn't produce truth. It just produces who's the better debater. So I'm social distancing, cooped up in this Groundhog Day experience with my family this Easter. How do I talk to the people I love that are not believers in a way that actually moves this conversation forward, Wesley?
Yeah, I think in our time and culture, story and narrative is really important. And I think that when we're talking about the resurrection, I think painting a picture of the narrative of human history is really important. In other words, just quick, I'll do this quickly, 3 to 5 minutes. God created, right? There was a God who created human beings, and he created a world, and he had a design for the world. And everything was functioning in rhythm and harmony with that design. It was perfect. Human relationships, human relationship with God, human creativity, building culture, taking the creation and ruling over it as co-rulers with God. Everything was functioning according to God's design and God's order. And then the human beings decided to walk away from God's rule and to walk away from God's design. Post that event, human history has been a history of the undoing of God's design, purpose, the image of God being marred in human beings. And we see the effects of that, particularly in a time like this. We are feeling that intimately. And I think that as we're telling that story, we have Jesus comes on the scene. God became a man, dwelt among us, and he did that for a number of reasons. One, he showed humanity who God was, right? John chapter 1, verse 16. He explained God to human beings. But he also did that because in his love for us, he wanted to repair what we broke, right? So we have this broken world. We're feeling it with disease and viruses and pain and suffering. But Jesus comes on the scene and he begins his project to repair not only human beings back to God, back into relational harmony as he designed, but also repair the world. That's Revelation 21 and 22. So when Jesus dies and rises again, he's doing a number of things. He's the first fruits, the scripture says. So he's the one who's proving to be deity, the first to rise from the dead. But that was the initial resurrection that leads to multiple resurrections. That's first, us being with God when we die, right? Like all of us, we have this fear of death, fear of the unknown. It's obscure. We want to understand and have some surety. And with Jesus, we find that. We find a loving God who wants us to be with him forever. Second is our bodies are important to God. So when the New Testament talks about resurrection, it's talking about the human body most of the time. That was the emphasis to the Jewish person. It wasn't my soul goes to be with God in a place called heaven. It's someday my body is going to be alive and perfected and in harmony with God's design forever and ever on earth. So we're going to be with God, but we're also going to have a resurrected body, and heaven's going to come down to earth, and all things are going to be repaired. And I think in a time like this, when we're facing so much personal pain and suffering, the story of the death and resurrection of Jesus is a story of God ultimately repairing all things back to his design, where never again will we experience, a pandemic or human suffering or pain or the losses and ramifications around an event like this. So I think that story is so important, because in our spirit, when we're grieving, when we're crying, when we're feeling loss, when we're feeling pain, all the emotions that come out of that are an expression that this is not the way it was intended to be. So I think every human being knows that this is not the way that the world was intended to be.
So I love the fact that there's a difference between making a point and telling a story. And, most of the Bible is narrative, and we learn way better in story than we do in bullet points.
Mm-hmm.
I love that. Help me figure out how to do that with my Uncle Bud who drinks a bud. I mean, do I just sit down with him and start going, here's the whole story of God from how we broke things to how, I found myself in those moments naturally where we're conversating, and I begin to tell my story of how that happened, or I begin to tell someone else's story. I don't know. Help me, Wesley, to not just sit down and be that Christian who doesn't blinks and goes through the whole redemptive story of God, but use the power of story to get the conversation going.
Yeah. I think it depends on the person and the generation. I think the way that I told it really relates to young people today. I think if you're sitting down with your Uncle Bob, the second story is there's a
it's Uncle Bud, by the way.
Uncle Bud.
Uncle Bud who drinks a bud.
There's a God who loves you. There's a God who wants you to know him, and he pursued you in the person of Jesus. I think that ultimately is a connection to every human heart. I think that people have to understand what he was trying to accomplish. And for me, I think we talk a lot about sin. That's one picture of what he's trying to accomplish on the cross, that he's forgiving our wrongdoing and our sin and our guilt and all that we carry around for the waywardness in our lives. But I think he's also ultimately trying to repair relationship, right? Mm-hmm. Romans chapter 1, we've been wandering. We haven't thanked God. We haven't acknowledged God. And I think in the fact that Jesus comes to this earth, dies upon a cross as an expression of his loving pursuit of human beings, he ultimately saying, I want to be with you again. And I want you to be with me. I want to repair this relationship, and I care about you. Your life matters enough for me to die on the cross for you.
You said something there I don't want us to miss. People want to hear this. This is one of the things that I have learned in apologetics and just hanging out with students and family members. The idea that I'm a sinner and my relationships are broken and my relationship with God is broken is something I intrinsically know. Mm-hmm. The idea that God loves me is something I intrinsically hope to be true, but I doubt, I struggle with. God loves other people, but he doesn't love me. And so when I actually engage in that story, could God love me? I'll tell people all the time, I said, never think the gospel stopped working, that we got too scientific for it, that we got too busy for it, that we got too digital for it. In our souls, we are definitely geared towards hearing that message. When the New Atheist started writing 20 years ago and 15 years ago, and then it's kind of peaked and hitches all that, I had a lot of friends who were really panicking. I said, ultimately, more God discussion is going to be good for God believers. And people are going to come to faith out of this, especially if the church is caring and smart in it. But in our souls, we know we're not alone. In our souls, we know that we need redemption. So let me just go to you, Dina, just directly here. So let's talk about the 20 somethings. Uncle Butter drinks a bud. He's going to be fine. What is it? You're a mom out there. You got a 20 something that's struggling in their faith. You are a friend out there. You've got a roommate struggling in your faith. And Wesley just told us that there's some generational difference in how we might approach telling this story and getting into this story. What's your advice to us as someone who works with our teens and 20 somethings every single week at Bayside?
Yeah. Well, first, I think anyone who's bringing up the question of did Jesus really rise from the dead, like, don't dodge that question. That's not an invitation to debate. It's an invitation to discuss. And so the more questions you can bring to that conversation, the better a time you're going to have. So I would follow it up with, what would it take to make you believe that someone rose from the dead? Like, what are we looking for here? How would we know it's true or not? Or how about, what would make you want to believe that Jesus rose from the dead? Like, if I presented you like perfect evidence that he rose from the dead, would you bow your knee now? If not, like, what would get you to the place where you wanted it to be true?
Repeat those two questions. Stop, Dean. I got to stop you. You're too brilliant, too fast. Those two questions, I love them both. Go ahead, say them again.
Yeah, so you have to remember my brilliance now. First would be just like, I'll start with the second one because I remember it because I just said it. What would make you want to believe the resurrection happened?
Yes.
Like, what would get you to the point where you actually wanted to believe it was true? And the first question that I asked is, what evidence would it take to convince you that it actually happened?
Yeah. Do you know what I love?
Those are great conversations.
Yeah, those are great conversations. Ken Costa. You guys know who Ken Costa is? One of the co-founders of the Alpha Course, one of the most effective courses for introducing people to Jesus. Andrew McCourt is friends with Ken Costa because Andrew McCourt, all of his friends are famous and powerful. And I'm just his little co-pastor. But I got to go to dinner with Ken. I'm not name dropping. I'm Andrew dropping name dropping. Okay, so we're at this dinner. And Andrew asks a brilliant question. He says, Ken, tell me why Alpha works so well. And here's what Ken Costa said. Nicky Gimbel, I think, is the original, and he's close friends. He said this: because we forbid the host to do anything but ask questions.
There it is.
We just ask questions. And we trust that the gospel works, and inside the heart of people is a desire to know their God. And so if we just keep asking questions, what would it take for you to actually believe this really happened? Is there anything that is keeping you from examining the evidence on this? Who have you read? I ask that question a lot of times. I go, tell me who you read, because you're getting this from somewhere. Oh, that's interesting. Wow, way to go that you read that person. Have you read this person? Have you listened to this person? What have you watched on YouTube? Man, most skeptics I run into, they've learned everything they know about the Old Testament from 5-minute clips on YouTube. And I'm going, I'm not against that. That's not the whole story. And it's almost always single issue interpretation of a very complex story. So I love those questions, Dina. Let me ask you this. I'm going to go back to you, Dina, one more time, because you got a small child and you deal with other people's children. So when is it, here's what bothers me about Easter sometimes. We put the little boys in suits and we put the little girls in dresses and we decorate eggs. I love decorating eggs. We're going to decorate eggs at my house this week. And we have ham and so we're not you, Wesley, because you're vegan. And when is it appropriate to talk to children about the reasonableness of our faith? I feel like a lot of Christians grow up and they learn about the pageantry of Easter, but they don't learn about the power of Easter. How do you have these conversations? When should you have these conversations? When are you going to start talking apologetics with that baby that you're hiding from in the car right now, Dina?
Oh, gosh. Well, she just started talking. So But the interesting thing is, even though she just started talking, Shane and I noticed that she was listening, like definitely around 9 months. Like she would have different facial expressions based on what we were talking about. So I'd say literally from the womb is the right time to start talking about Jesus, talking about the rationality of our faith. But I think the most important thing is to actually model that it's okay to ask questions.
Mm.
So parents, you don't have to have the answers. You don't have to be like, ugh, let me go back and watch what Dina said, even though Kurt only gave her 3 minutes. Like, you don't have to have the answers. Far more powerful is if you look your kid in the eyes and you say, that is a great question. Let's try to figure out the answer together. So mom's going to read some books. You stay off of YouTube, but I'll find you some books to read. And I just think that's so much more important than us having the answers on the spot. Because one day we're not going to be there to answer our kids' questions.
That's right.
But we need to model that faith can be sustained in the presence of questions.
Wesley, what's your response to that? What's your advice to parents? You're a pastor of a lot of different ages and stages of family. In terms of actually creating this dialogue within Christian families about knowing the why behind your faith, what's your advice?
I just want to piggyback off of something she said. That's so good. And I think it's important for us, especially in like our cultural context of the West and how we think. Mystery is a healthy part of our relationship with God. And I think that leads to discovery. We lean into mystery. We lean in when we want to discover something new about God, or maybe we don't know, but we lean into our relationship and our trust of him. And so, yeah, I don't have any kids. I have a 5-pound Chiweenie named Lucy. She's amazing. So I can't have these conversations with her, but I think what you said was so important. I think one, like modeling answering questions, but also modeling a true abiding relationship with Jesus. And through that everyday life reality, having conversations, just telling stories. I think, again, stories are so important. I think telling these stories that you're talking about, not just the resurrection, but the power of it and how it changed lives and changed nations and changed the Roman Empire and, so on and so forth. So I think telling stories is really important.
Here's my piece of advice I say to parents a lot is, like, from 0 to around 6 or 7, kids think that you know everything. And you got to, right around age 5 into 7, you got to start helping them understand you don't know everything. It's a beautiful thing to trust a parent, but they're in that stage where they're going, Daddy, why is the sky blue? And why do fish breathe water? And I can remember telling my kids, I'm so impressed that you think I know this stuff. But right around 3rd, 4th grade, they start developing critical thinking skills. And that's where really the church often makes a big mistake. We start dictating truth to kids to insulate them from lies. So learn all these truths instead of helping them learn to think about truth. And so I say it's not dictation, it's dialogue. And another thing I'll say to parents a lot is, you don't want the hardest part of your faith to be expressed to your child by someone else. You don't want them to hear about some of the stuff that's really hard to struggle with from a professor their freshman year in college, or from another 15-year-old in the locker room. And there is hard stuff to grapple with. There's good arguments on the other side that need to be grappled with, honestly. And you don't want them to hear that from other people first, because they'll feel betrayed. They'll like, oh, this has been hidden from me. What were they afraid of? Why didn't they tell me about atheists and agnostics and model agnostics? Why didn't they tell me about these ideas? And so, it's not just, first of all, you yourself have to be comfortable with having the dialogue. You got to be comfortable with it. And then you got to go, I have faith that our arguments stand up when they're looked at fairly. So I don't have to cloister my kids. I don't have to Amish my kids. So, hey, one more thing, and then I'm gonna let you guys have a final thought in there. I wanted to talk specifically to everyone about this unique Easter, and I hope you're having all these conversations I hope you'll share this with a friend and help them have the conversations. And I hope you're going to make the most out of this Easter. This is going to be an Easter like no other Easter in our whole lives. It's an Easter where we're going to be watching by Zoom and Teams and Roku. And it's an Easter where we're going to go to BaysideOnline.com and we're going to download the app and we're going to be sitting on couches in our pajamas. It's going to be a different Easter, maybe a better one. Maybe by stripping away all the pageantry, we can reconnect with the purpose of Easter, the reasons behind it, and the real power behind it. Maybe by taking away the trappings, we can have an Easter where we're transformed. I want to encourage you, take this Easter seriously. Don't let the fear of COVID diminish your experience. Let it help you lean into the experience. I said earlier, I was going to say a couple of resources. Even this week, as you're preparing for Easter, go get Tim Keller's books on apologetics. The Reason for God. What's the other one I'm thinking of, Dina?
Making Sense of God.
Making Sense of God and The Reason for God. Both great reads and both a way to take this issue of, is God reasonable? Is he fair and is he right in our modern world? And prepare your heart for Easter, and then even extend that on and go, I'm going to come out of this experience both smarter and more connected to God. So take that step. Dina, you had some resources for us. What were your resources?
I did. So I approached this question when I was studying this from the perspective of someone who thought this is probably something I have to take more on faith. But when I read these resources, I found out, wow, like even non-Christians like take seriously this aspect of my faith and our responsibility to figure out what happened historically. So N.T. Wright, if you really want a long book about this, wrote The Resurrection of the Son of God. It's literally like 600 pages on whether the resurrection happened historically. And then Gary Habermas wrote a great book called Risen Jesus, Future Hope. And then one more, Douglas Guyvett, he wrote the book In Defense of Miracles. And if you're someone who's like, you know, I don't even really know what's happening in my world today, much less what happened 2,000 years ago, this will answer all of your objections to really being a rational person that can accept the plausibility of miracles.
What about you, Wesley? You got a final exhortation for us?
My final thought is you two are amazing. Love being on this show. And I love what you said about Easter this year, that it's an opportunity to strip away everything else but Jesus and his death and resurrection and what all human hearts are needing in this time.
Awesome. Hey, two more I just thought of. John Dickerson, go look at his book. Mark Clark. So John and Mark, great job writing books that really do address both the evidence and the cultural piece out there. So Haley, would you put all of these books and resources in the notes? And Wesley, back at you. I love you. Love your heart. I love that church over there in Davis. Dina, go give that child a very big hug for us and tell her thank you for letting us borrow you for a few minutes. And then tell Shane he's a brave and a courageous father for watching that child all by himself. So, hey, you guys, as always, we want to tell you, share and like, share the flip side. We love thinking a little bit deeper about the weekend message and not just having it be on a Sunday. And speaking of the weekend message, we had literally hundreds of thousands of people tune into our last message. The numbers were off the charts. This Easter, we've put together special efforts. Every single campus is doing the same message with their campus pastors preaching it. I'll be on the Granite Bay campus at our normal times. Saturday night, we're going to do an actual Good Friday service in our Saturday night service. So Friday at noon, Friday at 7, and then Saturday at 4:45. The other campuses that run Saturday services will also be showing the Good Friday service in their Saturday time. And then join us Sunday morning. Join us Sunday morning at your regular campus or regular service time and include someone in. You can find me at 8:15, 9:45, 11:30, and 7 p.m. on BaysideOnline.com, Granite Bay campus. Also, Facebook Live is going to be at 9:45 and 7 p.m. so you can watch the service there. Bayside Online, the app, or Facebook Live. I really do hope you'll join us and bring some friends. Let's be the church We're scattered, but we can gather together and make a difference for Christ, especially this Easter. God bless you guys. Thanks for sharing and liking The Flip Side. We'll see you next week.